I recently installed some speaker jacks on a couple of these solid state practice amps so I could run them into the 412 down here. And it's fun. It's pretty cool to hear a tiny solid state practice amp through a 412. So that's what we're doing today. I've got my 412 mic'd up with the ATM 41, which is a nice vintage alternative to an SM57. I've got some pedals here. I've got 2 amps. We're going to try them both out. I've got this Peavey Rage 108 and the Crate G-20C, and they're both 80s solid state practice amps. I've also got my little Zoom H6 recorder over here with the stereo capsules, so you can kind of get an idea of how it sounds in the room. I have no idea how those mics will turn out, but otherwise, this will just sound like a mic'd up cab, which is great. Most of us, when we see a little amp like this, think of a bad sounding tiny speaker in a tiny little open back cabinet. This one's an 8-inch speaker. These are, I think, 5 or 6-inch speakers, 4.5, 5, something like that. Doesn't really make us think of good tone. Now, being a smart person, you know that speakers are the most important part of your tone, and when you put it through a nice 412, you get a sound that's pretty cool. Now, it's not a boutique tube amp. It's definitely a little solid state amp, but that's not a bad thing. I quite like the sound, and want to share it with you today. Another nice thing about solid state amps is that you don't need a load on them. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, with a tube amp, you're going to need a load box if you want to record it silently without a speaker cabinet. It's very dangerous and will break your amp if you run a tube amp without a speaker connected. So I assumed solid state worked the same way, but they don't. So that's awesome. You can just disconnect a speaker from a solid state amp and it won't break anything. Or you can do as I've done, install a speaker jack, which is just a regular guitar jack, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Install a speaker jack, hook up the speaker to that. Now the speaker is bypassed in this, and if I want to record it silently, I just don't plug in a speaker. It's fantastic. You can use these silently. Solid state amps just have their own character that works really well for some things, like with the HM2, which we'll also get into. But for now, let's just check out this little Peavey Rage through the 412. Gonna turn on my tube screamer here. One issue with the Rage is that the highs are a little bit too spiky, and if I turn them down, sometimes it gets too dark. So finding the sweet spot for the high frequencies can be a bit tricky, and this doesn't have an effects loop, so I can't put an EQ in post. I could do that with plugins when I'm recording. In this case, live with a cab, it's a little harsh on the top end, but that's kind of what we expect from a solid state amp, so it fits the bill. It's also surprisingly loud. I measured it at over 100 decibels at about 6 feet away with the volume only at a 4 on the amp. So that's as loud as I wanted to go for the sake of my ears, but it could go even louder. And I don't know that it's quite enough to gig with, but it's pretty close. And I've gigged with my 15-watt tube amp, and I don't know if there's a big volume difference there. Now, of course, we got to check it out with the HM2. That's the reason I bought this amp. That's kind of what it does well, and something that I find solid state just does a lot better than tube amps. I never liked the sound of an HM2 with a tube amp. It's kind of messy, but with a solid state, it's perfect. I like to run the amp just with enough bite to it, a little kind of crunch tone. I'll show you what that sounds like. As you can see, it's really sick. I got one more pedal for you here. This is the Pigtronix Disnortion. It's a fuzz overdrive thing. I haven't done a video on it, but it's fun, I guess. Let's check it out. This is the G-20C, and it's 20 watts, and that 5 watts makes a big difference, actually. It's noticeably quite a bit more powerful than the Peavey, and it doesn't really do as high gain of a sound on its own, but with a tube screamer or with a distortion pedal, it certainly gets gnarly. This one actually has a built-in spring reverb. It has a stereo chorus with no parameters to adjust. You just turn it on or off. And I am going to do a full video on that one at some point and show off. It actually sounds beautiful with its built-in speakers and the stereo chorus for a clean amp. Not so much for a high gain amp. But the Peavey, that does work better for your high gain sounds. And I did a whole video on it. You can check up the card there. I mean, it's not going to get you a modern metal tone, but it's great for black metal. So that's what I did with it. So let's crank up the gain on the crate. It's already cranked up. That's as high as the gain goes on this without a boost. Let's kick on the tube screamer. And now the HM2. This thing is nasty with an HM2. It's beautiful. I love it. As much as I love the solid state Peavey and HM2 combo, both of these crates here, they just rip. And this one surprisingly rips super hard, even though it kind of is a weak amp on its own. But man, with an HM2, this thing just, it's powerful in the room too. You can't feel the low end, but I can. Let's try this Pigtronix Disnortion. We can check out the reverb too. Now, in order to get this beautiful setup, I put a speaker jack on, and I just bought, I'll link the Amazon part. It was like $9 for 6 of these. It's just a guitar input jack with a plate. That was the important thing, and they worked out just fine. They were really cheap. I needed a bunch of them, and I got a bunch of them for under $10. It's metal. I know it's hanging off the edge. It looks a little bit crappy. I tried drilling a hole in the bottom, and you know, it didn't work out. The jack is too big. The wood is too thick. You'd have to have a really big hole, and this plate isn't that big. So, yeah, that didn't work out perfectly. But this is actually perfectly sturdy. It really doesn't flex. I'm not worried about it pulling out. It doesn't feel flimsy. It's a metal jack, so that works just fine, and it's really easy to install. Just stick a couple screws in there. I did on 3 different cabs. It's perfectly sturdy on all of them. So that's what you gotta do. And then just put the speaker wires in. All of these cabs had clips already, so it was really easy to just unhook the speaker, plug that in. I could always swap it back and forth. Or if I want to record silently, just don't put a speaker in here, and I can run it direct into my computer, record silently, and it works perfectly. So that's how you turn your practice amp into a sick rig. Just provide your own 412. You can get them pretty cheap used if you're lucky. And hope you enjoyed this. As always, smash like and subscribe. See you in the next video.